Adventure games might be a lost art, especially adventure games that focus on story versus gameplay. Adventure games were rampant in the early 2000s and pre-2000s. Now you really only see them made by indie companies. Sure, you might see a AAA game with adventure elements in it, but they are rarely actual adventure games that have a more story focus versus a gameplay focus. Luckily for us though, we had two very notable adventure games released in only the last 3 years. Dreamfall Chapters and Life is Strange are both story-focused adventure games. Although the title of this video says Versus, I don't want you guys to think that it is a competition between these two games. Instead, I wanted to make this video because I thought that there was some very nice similarities between these games, but also subtle but impactful differences. Dreamfall Chapters and Life is Strange first and foremost are both created by foreign developers. Dreamfall being created by a Norwegian company, Red Thread Games, and published by Funcom, and Life is Strange being created by a French company, Don't Nod Entertainment, and published by Square Enix. Both games also feature female protagonists, as well as tackle some very interesting and confusing ideas concerning space and time manipulation and the existence of parallel worlds. So why is the fact that both of these games have female protagonists particularly relevant or even notable? Well, that's because the adventure game genre is a genre in which, well, it's male-dominated. If you look at the forefathers of the industry, Myst, Secret of Monkey Island, and King's Quest, these are games that are almost all dominated by male characters. It's not just the fact that the protagonists are female, it's that they're good female characters, something that seems to be, well, a rarity in games. Life is Strange has Max Caulfield, the teenage girl nearing the end of high school and full of teenage angst. Then you have Zoe Castillo in Dreamfall, a college student with little to no direction trying to find her place in the world. Both of these characters are not only female, but they exhibit real qualities present in women and frankly people their age. They are not static characters, and they are not characters who lack subtlety. Think Mass Effect characters. Trying to fit in is a normal occurrence when introduced to a new environment, especially when people in this environment are teenage kids full of angst in the case of Life is Strange. Max has to deal with the drama present at her school, while also dealing with her newfound superpower to control and manipulate time. Don't Nod creates a scenario that is, well, frankly believable. How many times have you, when you were younger, or even now, I still wish, had superpowers? Imagine getting them when you were in high school, trying to figure out life and how to still be cool and things like that. Max has that clash of conflicts in her story, which makes her more relatable. It makes her more believable. She's a kid going through school trying to find her way, but she also has to juggle and deal with this extraordinary magical gift that she has.
My name is Max Caulfield. I'm 18 years old. Years ago, my family moved away and I left behind my childhood. After 5 years, I'm back in my hometown, Arcadia Bay, Oregon. Now I'm studying photography at Blackwell Academy, my new home. In the end, it's still high school, which kind of sucks.
She has that childlike innocence early on, where she does have the desire to save everybody, but as the story progresses, Max learns of the harsh realities of her powers and her journey, and has to come to grips with them in order to save people. The problem she has, though, is who to save. Then you look at Zoe Castillo in Dreamfall. She has a story that many millennials can relate to. Society tells you to get a degree in college and to go on and be successful and everything else, but society doesn't really equip you with finding your passion in life. It doesn't really tell you how to be happy. Many people find themselves lost in college, without direction of where or how to get somewhere. Zoe is experiencing this in Longest Journey, where she's on the verge of dropping out of college because she's bordering on depression with a lack of direction. However, when she discovers a parallel world, Arcadia, which is a world full of magic and mystery, it's a stark contrast to her home world of stark, pun not really intended, which is heavily focused on technology and loss of self. She is then revitalized and full of excitement, still trying to figure everything out. However, much like Max Caulfield in Life is Strange, Zoe has to balance this discovery with her duties and expectations in the real world. It creates another dual conflict, where you have to juggle both realities. Zoe wants to abandon her real life, but she soon learns that the magical world of Arcadia isn't exactly filled with rainbows and magical unicorns.
There are two worlds, Stark and Arcadia. Stark is the world you know, the world of the mundane, of logic and order, a rational world bound by the physical laws of the universe. The other world lies across the divide. Arcadia is a world of magic, of mystery and chaos, a world in flux, unbound by laws. These twin worlds exist in parallel and in balance. There are those who can move freely between worlds. They are called shifters. There are few of them left now.
She then finds herself knee-deep in conspiracies in the world of Stark and a rebellion in the world of Arcadia. Both worlds edge closer and closer to each other as problems of both start to help us understand what's going on and if these two worlds are linked. Both games do a great job of creating a realistic and believable world, not to mention realistic and believable characters. Sure, discovering magical worlds and how to manipulate time isn't exactly realistic, but the characters are relatable, so when they do discover these powers or worlds, they seem to be like they're trying to cope with the realities of it, something that, well, you or I would do. This is a better character development than that of the character in a video game who discovers their power and is immediately some powerful wizard or world beater or whatever else. Not to mention both Max and Zoe are average characters. They're average Janes, if you will. They discover that they have these magic powers, but they also discover that these powers are directly related to the problems that start to manifest as the story progresses. Next thing you know, the innocent female protagonist is thrust face first into some crazy situations where not just her life is being threatened, but possibly that of everyone she knows. But you don't stay the innocent protagonist forever. You're not the damsel in stress as in most games. No, as both games progress, you are forced to make decisions to act, or you will surely be doomed. But instead of it feeling forced, the character's eventual realization of this fact helps the character develop fully. The thing that really stands out for me in both games, though, is their fearlessness in talking about taboo subjects, not to mention their mixing of philosophy and science. Dreamfall is a story about a world where a powerful agency has taken control of the government. They then created an authoritative government that tracks its citizens with surveillance and polices their thoughts and opinions. Meanwhile, Life is Strange, on the other hand, we tackle subjects like bullying, suicide, sexual harassment, and even murder. Max in Life is Strange has to encounter countless instances of bullying and sexual harassment, and she even has to tackle the ideas of psychopathy and murder. Mind you, she doesn't just start at those last two things, but she slowly builds up to those points. Still, these are not very talked about things in video games. Video game stories are typically about the heroic journey to defeat evil, or one based in a fantasy or future universe where you have to do good or whatever. Now, Life is Strange is a modern story, and it tackles modern themes, especially themes that are particularly relevant to high school and youth culture, such as suicide and bullying. Subjects relatively untouched by games, but Don't Nod tells them brilliantly. They aren't afraid to ruffle a few feathers with their portrayal of this in Life is Strange. Now, when we look at the story of Max Caulfield, we can't help but notice it is ripe with Greek literature. You have your tragic hero, a character with flaws who is relatable, but also has some crazy, strong, powerful feature to them. In Max's case, her ability to manipulate time. You also can notice the appeals to pathos, or pity towards the protagonist, or main character, which sort of goes hand in hand with her being a tragic hero. You have a character full of hubris or overconfidence, the villain, and the game is even designed in episodes, which is something that is really related to Greek culture. Time manipulation is also not stranger to Greek culture, as a famous figure in Greek literature is the Titan Kronos, who is also the god of time. But then the story takes another path. It becomes less of a Greek tragedy and more focused on ideas presented in philosophy or science such as the chaos theory and the butterfly effect. These are more modern ideas, which marks a stark switch of focus for the game. The chaos theory is an incredibly complex concept. I won't really dive too deep into it in this video, but it is essentially a mixing of science and philosophy. Chaos theory in a nutshell is a branch of mathematics focused on the behavior of dynamical systems that are highly sensitive to initial conditions, a response popularly referred to as the butterfly effect. Small differences in initial conditions, such as those due to rounding errors and numerical computation, yield widely diverging outcomes for such dynamical systems, rendering long-term prediction of their behavioral impossible in general. You might be asking, how does this relate to philosophy? Well, it's not something that's entirely well understood. As such, philosophers, or studiers of philosophy, attempt to assign their own meaning and understanding to it. A mathematician might be able to take the mathematical theory of deterministic chaos and attempt to predict the future, except that any change in data, no matter how small, essentially makes it impossible to determine the said future. Some philosophers also appear to believe that chaos theory can provide all the randomness needed to prevent free will from being deterministic, which means that life is essentially how you choose it to be minus the randomness. In simple terms, this is why a computer cannot tell us accurately what the weather is going to be days ahead. Why didn't I just describe that to you guys instead of making it super complicated? Anyway, you might be wondering, how does this relate to the story? Well, as you play through Life is Strange, you realize attempting to change actions in the games and rewriting the world, trying to eliminate that randomness, starts to unravel the world, causing unknown amounts of problems, especially because you can't determine how changing even small things can have massive implications on the story and world. Looking back on it, it's kind of easy to see why Don't Nod had a really hard time telling this story, because that was a lot of technical jargon that's frankly pretty hard for most, including myself, to understand. So Dreamfall is a bit more dystopian in nature, which, although the word dystopian is rooted in the Greek language, the literature is based in the late 1800s, carrying us into the modern times with authors like H.G. Wells. Dreamfall presents the idea of a world where technology has ruled, and people have largely lost their uniqueness of self. Surveillance and totalitarian forms of governments exist because of a popular and powerful corporation, Wadi Corp. Wadi Corp has immense wealth and political control. This story plays out almost like a postmodernist style of story famous in movies like Blade Runner and Total Recall. Modernism, or postmodernism, is literature characterized by a reliance on narrative techniques such as fragmentation, paradox, and the unreliable narrator. It's often, though not exclusively, defined as a style or trend which emerged in the post-World War II era. Total Recall probably has the most clear influence on Dreamfall, as the story of Zoe is one of technology which allows users to dream and be ported to the other world. If you remember, Total Recall also had something like this. In Zoe's case, however, it ports her to another realm or world known as Arcadia, where magic rules and technology doesn't really exist. It's a stark contrast from... okay, I'll stop making that stupid pun, but it's a stark contrast from the world of Stark. The world of Stark is a world where science has prevailed. The interesting part of the contrast is that in dystopian worlds, too much technology, as explained by art or literature style of modernism, or its more exaggerated brother postmodernism, is a negative thing that drains the uniqueness of the individual. In Arcadia, however, magic is the ruling power and individuality is more common. However, as the story of Zoe Castillo plays out, in Dreamfall you learn that the magic and science world are almost destined to clash, especially when non-magic types in Arcadia try and kill or control the magic users in favor of more scientific methods. This happens parallel with the story of Stark, which in a strange way is proof of what happens to Arcadia if all magical beings are eradicated. So both games are fearless in their attacking of taboo subjects, and both games intertwine the ideas of science versus philosophy, or a more esoteric view of things. You have a constant sense of conflict, not just by the characters' development and their struggles with themselves, but also the very ideological views of the game and its attempts to teach you of these said views. Magic versus science is a big theme in both games that manifests in different ways. This is what really makes these games unique for me. I've never really seen two games in particular juggle rather complex ideologies, but also tackle hard-hitting taboo subjects. Life is Strange's final episode pissed off a great many of people and, well, was polarizing. I would probably say I was one of those people, initially at least, so let me explain. There are a few reasons why Life is Strange is more controversial than Dreamfall Chapters. Firstly, Chapters is a sequel in Longest Journey, which means it had around 3 different games to explain the story fully, something that Life is Strange lacked. People accused Life is Strange's final episode of not being very good at explaining, well, what the story was. Though, people forget that when Longest Journey, the second game, finished, it was similar to Life is Strange in the fact that it was also polarizing, mostly due to a cliffhanger of an ending. Life is Strange, however, cut the game off arguably short, and doesn't really provide you any more chances for an explanation. This is a stark contrast with Dreamfall Longest Journey and Dreamfall Chapters, as you had a third game to explain the entirety of the story. Life is Strange, though, doesn't get a new game to explain it. No new comic, no stories, no shorts. Sure, Life is Strange is set to get both a sequel and a live-action film. The game is only really said to be a sequel in name, though, and the story is not supposed to follow that of Max Caulfield. Maybe the live action, on the other hand, will explain the story more, but I have my reservations. What I really want to emphasize on is how Life is Strange's story told its story versus Dreamfall Chapters. Dreamfall had choices and decisions. Much like Life is Strange, the game also tracked your decisions, letting you know if they would have a negative or positive effect on the story. However, the most key difference was that Dreamfall made those choices mainly about altering parts of the story and less of the overall narrative. Life is Strange repeatedly told its player that the decisions you make would change the past, present, and future of the game. It had a large emphasis on choice, so when the final episode came along and you realized nearly all of the decisions you had made really hadn't affected the ending of the plot, people were notably upset. However, why didn't Dreamfall get the same treatment? Because as I previously outlined, Dreamfall didn't beat you over the head with the idea that your choices mattered so much. Dreamfall told its own story, with choices being a sort of auxiliary part of the story. Life is Strange kept stressing that its choices were so large that you had to take your time when making these decisions. It even gave you the ability to rewind and then change the decisions each time Max Caulfield would express that this said choice could be negative or positive. It would almost always give you some sense of regret after making a choice, even if you made the right or wrong one. So when the end of the game came along and people were like, well, all these decisions I made were so impactful, let's see how they play out in the climax episode. And then they were met with, well, your decisions, we sort of have to undo them all. Sorry about that. Now, is Don't Nod Entertainment justified in their explanation of why? I think absolutely. If you start to understand chaos theory, as I previously outlined, you learn that something called the butterfly effect is possible. You can't change actions in the story because you could create a catastrophe that can't be reversed. This comes to Max Caulfield and the player, you, rather slowly as you play through the game, however. It's most evident when you attempt to go back and save Chloe's father. You realize that, well, you can't, because it will set off some chain reactions that is far worse than the actual actions that happened. You sort of come to the realization over time, through parts of the game, that the more you try and change history, the more possible mistakes you could make. It's the sad realization that you can't play God, or at least you can't manipulate time and space and expect no negative side effects. It's a meaningful lesson, but the game is given such a bad rep because of how it was executed. It clearly seemed rushed. If Don't Nod Interactive had more time, they might have been able to have a more complete end, as exhibited by Dreamfall Chapters. Some of the final scenes in the episode polarizing seem completely out of place. For example, when you're dreaming and running around through some amalgamation of reused assets.
Hey Max, do you want to say hello to Rachel? She's posing for me.
You
in
took
hell.
some of my drugs. Maybe
Oh, when did I get bad bottle karma?
Just because I'm mentally ill.
Was there one more left?
now that Rachel's dead, it's time for you.
I know it was your birthday last month. This was my real father's camera. I want you to have it.
Yes, of course it's cool. Thank you. This camera is so sweet.
Now that we got that mushy shit out of the way,
I feel like stage diving. Let's thrash this place.
Is this supposed to tell us something? It came together as rather garbled. What is chaos theory? Why isn't the butterfly effect really mentioned? There should have been a scene where Warren, the smart scientist kid, explained the science behind it more. Which is not to say that you should have everything explained to you. I don't believe in having your hand held through everything. But you need more answers to the questions presented by Life is Strange than the answers that Don't Nod gave you. In conclusion, Don't Nod wanted you to experience the moment of powerlessness, the moment of your realizations that you cannot change the events in the game. It's what brings you to understand Max and her situation on a better level. You as the player and Max as the character both come to the ultimate understanding that you cannot change time. What's past is the past. I just think that they could have told it a little bit better. Thanks for watching though, guys, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you guys thought either game sounded interesting, please play these games. They are great games. Especially Dreamfall, which is lesser known than Life is Strange, but it's still a great game. Please know that you do not have to play The Longest Journey in order to play Dreamfall, but it certainly helps. At least be willing to do a little bit of research or reading. Though Dreamfall starts with a video showing you the things that happened in the previous games, it serves as a good reminder of sorts. That's all I really have for you guys. Social media links are on the screen. If you agreed or disagreed, please let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, please drop a like. If you want to see more content like this and more content like my Death of a Game videos, please subscribe to my channel. I also put my link to the Discord channel where you can join other like-minded gamers and debate video games as well as play together. And finally, my Patreon link where you can support me in more content like this. Especially you that are using an ad blocker, which I don't blame you. I don't like ads myself. But that's the end of this video. nerdSlayer out.